Zen foliage has been designed to respond to the player in a number of ways. In dark areas, where the flashlight is active, some Zen flora will animate or expand in response to the light. These Zen plants respond to the proximity of the player's hand by glowing and pulsing. The glow effect in particular is rendered with an offset using the correct binocular perspective for each eye, which gives the impression that the glow originates in the interior of the organism. The Zen flora's shader effects, which rely on hand proximity, take their input from a dynamic voxel field which follows the player at all times. The player's hands effectively draw motion trails in this voxel field, which can be sampled by the foliage's shaders to drive deformations and other shading effects. If the player moves their hands quickly, they produce motion trails in the voxel field. If they hold their hands still, they produce a radiating force. These different types of motion characteristics allow us to create different behaviors in the foliage to give it a bit of extra personality.
Particle effects present an interesting challenge in VR due to stereopsis, which is our ability to discern the depth of objects from two slightly different views of the world we see from our two eyes. Traditional particle systems, as seen on the left, were typically implemented as a series of flipbook images displayed on relatively large polygons, which orient to face the player. Each series of images would contain effectively a little movie of a more complex phenomenon like a wafting puff of smoke or a flickering flame and so on. For the monoscopic rendering used in non-VR systems, this approach holds up well and is widely used across the industry. Because of the stereo rendering used in VR, however, players can easily see the flat cards resulting in the unconvincing effect seen on the left. To address this, we had to update our particle rendering techniques for VR. The particle system on the right is an updated VR-friendly version of the older effect seen on the left. One technique we used on large cards, like the ones used in this smoke effect, was to create some drag on the card's reaction to the player's head movement. To do this, we created another particle system which lagged the player's position and was used as a player camera for the facing direction of the smoke cards. By removing this one-to-one relationship of head motion to sprite rotation, we were able to give the impression that the smoke effect was volumetric. In addition to using more 3D elements in the creation of our effects, we also often use the post-processing bloom on particles to help visually merge elements that otherwise would appear as a set of flat planes. This made the cards harder to stereo fuse, which gave them a more diffuse volumetric feel.
Last two.
One of the tenets of Half-Life game design is creating crafted, moment-to-moment experiences that players participate in as they progress through the game. Sometimes this means playing with emotional responses to turn something undesirable into a memorable highlight. This collapsed section of the hotel features this type of experience. Players are often instinctively pulled to the safest-looking location in a given area, and here that would be the well-lit corridor above. But when they get there, they find their way blocked by a Combine power shield. The power cable to shut down the Combine force field leads them back down into the poison headcrab-infested darkness below, a place they really didn't want to go. These larger gameplay spaces also need to be resilient to player choice, so even if a player chooses not to head up to the well-lit corridor, they likely will still have the same trepidation about heading down into the darkness below. After the player has braved the darkness and sheltered themselves in the lit room where they're safe from the wandering headcrabs, they're faced with the daunting task of cutting the power to the Combine force field, because this has the side effect of plunging the area into darkness. Not only does that make the situation worse, since the player must make their way out of the pitch blackness with only a flashlight, but the path to the exit is back through all the poison headcrabs. We spent a lot of time tuning this experience through careful playtesting and evaluation. And often, when recounting their travels through the hotel in post-playtest discussions, players would recall this moment of being plunged into darkness as a high point, managing to combine a feeling of amusement with the overall sense of dread.
Combine shield blocking your path.
I'll figure out how to shut it down.
mine weapons unbonded.
How are you sure?
It's still in the case. They never leave them in the case.
Nice.
I didn't even need to edit your genetic code.
I know. You would love that.
That's okay. There'll be a next time.
Last cell.
Yes.
lot of shells.
A common game design problem is that of resource placement, and this spot in the game is a good example. Players have just left an area where they acquire the combine submachine gun, and whenever they get a new weapon, we try to give the player the opportunity to experiment with it right away. So, right after the SMG, we make sure to give the player a bunch of ammo for it and a supply of not too threatening enemies, in the form of confined zombies and wandering headcrabs to experiment on. But playtesting has shown us that there's a wide range of ways that players respond to that setup. Some shoot a headcrab or two and move on, but some players take their time exploring the weapon, even using up all the ammunition we gave them. Now, after the headcrabs, the player is heading towards a new area, which features one of the hardest combat arenas in the game, where they must fight 2 revivers at the same time. How much ammunition can we expect the player to have here? How much should we put in this area between the 2 arenas to ensure all players will have enough to fight the 2 revivers? If we don't put in enough, player may be in a position where they cannot succeed at the upcoming encounter, and reloading their save games won't help them. They will need to go back and replay the previous area, this time conserving more ammo. That's not something we want to happen, nor is it something that we can expect all players to realize. Instead, many will repeatedly try and fail to be the 2 revivers. So, at its core, the problem with resource placement is that the dynamic range of resources carried by players can be significant, and it gets even wider as the game progresses. In Half-Life Alyx, we would see some players end the game with barely any ammunition, while other players had over 1,000 unused rounds.
So how can we handle resource placement when there's such a wide dynamic range in player collection and usage patterns? Like many games, we opted for a dynamic system that looks at the player's current resource counts and makes decisions based on them. But the design of these kinds of systems can be tricky, because they tend to affect player behavior. For instance, in Half-Life 2, we placed breakable crates throughout the game which dynamically spawned resources based on the player's current health and ammo levels. This had the advantage of allowing us to not need a huge amount of playtesting for resource balancing, because as long as there were enough crates around, the player would always have enough resources. But because that system exists, we didn't have to spend much time on resource placement, and as a result, we didn't really craft challenges around resource collection. Players also learned that they didn't need to really care about the resource levels, because the crates were always going to top them up on whatever they needed most. For Half-Life Alyx, we wanted to revisit those assumptions. We knew that searching for resources in a VR environment was something players really enjoyed. So we wanted resource collection to be something players needed to do throughout the entire game. And that meant we didn't want them to ever reach the point where they had so much ammo and health that they didn't need to explore. We were also able to start playtesting earlier in the product development cycle than we had been able to when making Half-Life 2, which gave us the confidence that we'd be able to spend the time we needed to carefully place every resource.
For Half-Life Alyx, we moved to a system that allowed us to craft a more specific experience, using a dynamic layer that attempts to reduce the dynamic range of resource gathering between players. Instead of placing generic resources that switch types, level designers carefully placed each resource type throughout the world. Some are easy to find, and some are more difficult. Then, as the player moves forward in the world, the system opportunistically removes resources in the path ahead based on the player's current resource levels. This had the benefit of allowing level designers to have a lot of control over the player's resource amounts in different areas of the game. They were able to craft areas where they wanted the player to be starved of one ammo type or encouraged to use another. For example, in this area, designers could provide enough ammo to ensure that the player would have enough to fight 2 revivers, with the knowledge that the ammo balancing system would remove much of it if the player was already loaded up. We could safely give the players a large amount of Combine SMG ammo in the previous arena, and know that the players who ran past the poison head crabs without firing a shot wouldn't find more here. There are a number of additional features to address complexities that result from this system, such as ensuring players always find something inside a Combine locker, or ensuring that players are still rewarded for searching carefully and regularly, even if they're carrying a lot of ammo. Ultimately, we want a player who is paying more attention to the environment to come out ahead resource-wise. We just needed some dials to be able to control how far ahead they got.
Up until this point, each Reviver encounter has been focused on teaching players something new about the Reviver so that they can defeat it. This arena represents the culmination of the training. There are no new rules, there is nothing to learn about the Reviver itself. By this point, players are armed with the knowledge required to progress. The challenge then shifts into a combat problem where strategy and execution are required. Players have to juggle and prioritize multiple targets, utilize all of their weapons, and manage a constrained supply of ammunition in order to prevail and make their way back out to the exterior of the hotel, so they can deactivate the combined substation.
Two shells left. I'm out!
dog come back again, Alyx?
Yeah, this one was kind of rough.
You're all right, though, right?
Yeah, Russ. I'm good.
Well, we've got to get you out of here and up to the roof.
I'm working on it.